There's a very interesting hypothesis that I have about writers and the most talented writer in the world. And what I've said before is that I think the most talented writer of our generation is probably somebody who none of us have ever heard of. And the reason for that is because this person has probably never finished a single piece of work or has always been too intimidated to ever send it off. There's a lot of people who are very, very skilled. There's a lot of talented writers, but there are people who I've never read before because they never finished their books. They never finished their stories. They don't ever get to that point where they're comfortable sending something off. They can always find a small mistake in the work and they go back and they tinker with it, right? And so much of writing is about sending work off. That's really what you do. As a creative person, that's what you do. You're not paid to be creative. You're paid to send off, right? Now, I talked about this a couple weeks ago, where I'd said you probably don't need as much like musing or a creative spark. What you need more of is a tighter deadline. And this is very true for most people. Even like, so I'll give an example. Last night, one of the people I coach, I was going through with them, and they've been working on a short story for about since like the end of April. So what's that, like 5 months, something like that? And so weekly we've been working on stuff, getting it, a little bit further down the line. They struggle a little bit with writing, with focus and all that. But we now have kind of a working, I'll call it like third draft, like a working third draft. And yeah, it's not the greatest story, but it's workable. And so this week when I met with them, I was telling them, all right, like take the week. Your assignment is take the week and just basically go through the draft, do another round of edits on it, get the whole week to do it. And they didn't do anything. They did nothing. They did not do a single editing job at all. And instead what they submitted basically was the first draft of another short story that they wrote this week instead. Okay. And so a lot of the early part of my session with them was talking about this idea that you need to push through and get these stories done. And this is somebody who's paying me, right? Like, this is somebody who's actually got like a financial incentive to get things done. And yet, even with that, even with, paying me for it's been more than 5 months, but just for the 5 months that I've worked with them, they still have not gotten the story done. Like, they still have not made the progress in getting the story done, despite how much I've been kind of encouraged them to, hey, get it done. Like, just keep pushing through this here. This is something that I'm certain with their talent level they could have gotten done by like the middle of the summer. But here we are in September and they simply haven't. And the reason for it, and not in so many words, but the reason for it is simply for them, it's a lack of confidence in their work. It's a lack of belief that their work is doable, and it's a lack of understanding about what needs to be fixed. Because when you get to the higher kind of levels of your drafts, right, you have to go more and more minute. You have to go further in understanding what's not working with your piece, and you have to make those big corrections. And it is so difficult. It is so hard to make those kind of corrections and to really sit there and dial it in. But that's what's going to get your story published, is making those small corrections. And as emotionally difficult as it is to just sit there and really try and figure out what's not working with a piece, even after looking at it, for days or weeks, or even worse, to recognize what you need to do, but realize that it's going to take you, weeks to rewrite certain sections or redo it. That's what you need to do. Like, that is what needs to happen. And I think that fear in doing that type of work and not willing to push yourself that highest level there at the end, that's what stops a lot of people from ever getting recognized. It's very strange. In a lot from the outside, it's very strange because you've already done at least the majority of the work, right? Like, you've probably already gotten at least 75% of the way there. And so why not do the last 25 and get presumably a payoff for it? But that's what we do. We always seem to be okay doing the first like 75%. We're always okay, doing those first few struggles on a new project, those first couple drafts, whatever. But when it comes time to really dial it in, when it gets really difficult, even though it's that last 25%, it is the hardest part of it. And we always seem willing to stop right at that point. We can see the finish line and we just stop. We have writing senioritis, maybe, what the term is. It's a strange one. It's a strange feeling. And I go through this myself. I everything I complain about is something I've gone through before. There's plenty of stories that I have a whole short story collection that will never see the light of day that I wrote a couple years ago during my MFA that I will just never submit. It's work that I like. I think that if I was to put like a year into all these stories, I probably could get them all done and finished. But I simply don't want to. Part of it is just I'm not the same person I was when I wrote it originally, and the story doesn't feel true to me anymore. That's the main reason why that collection doesn't hold much interest to me now. But with that all being said, I did take a bunch of time and work on a project and then stop without getting the payoff. So the only person who loses out is myself. And that's why I say I think the greatest writer is someone who you've never heard of. I think there is a writer out there. I think there's a writer who's a hobbyist who just diligently writes all the time, kind of like almost like a J.D. Salinger in his later years, who just writes as like a hobby and never intends for anyone to ever see their work, and or is too timid to ever send it off, or they get their work 75% of the way done here, kind of like I just gave the example, and they get, when it's time to submit it, they get really worried, or they don't do that last draft that gets their work to really shine, and it never gets known. And so this person who is potentially like the next James Joyce, right, the next Nabokov, next Tolstoy, this person never gets recognized. This person will never be known because they aren't willing to push through that last difficult part and shut down that negative part of their mind and just send stuff off. I am certain they're out there. I am quite certain of it. There's too many writers, too many of us that are writing to not have the most talented person probably be in that pool. But we'll never know. We'll never see them. We'll never know. And so it becomes that sort of Zen question about if a tree falls in the forest, no one hears it, does it make a sound, right? If the greatest writer in the world never publishes anything and no one ever becomes aware of them, did they ever exist, right? Do their works ever exist? Are they actually the greatest writer? But for us, it is about submitting. It's about getting stuff off. And so those of you that are along your publishing journey, I wish you luck and keep submitting.